Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education certification course. Everyone standing can be seated. Those of you that are coming in, welcome. Those of you that are joining online, thank you for joining us. If you could be turning in your books over to LP5, page E, LP5, page E, we're going to reread the procedure we left off in, review a little bit, and then we're going to continue to move forward with a topic that when you're teaching in schools, you have to be very careful. When you're teaching anywhere, you have to be very careful. And we'll get in and talk about why, but there's a lot of facts that we need to know as a society that can cause people to be very uncomfortable. And you never know when you're speaking to a group of people what their situations are, what experiences they've had, and even what they're doing presently in their life. So keep that in mind as you're turning over. And as you're turning over, for all those online who have are still requesting our books, if you could, just send your request to either info@peacefulsolution.org, or you can send it there to our Facebook page. Just make a request, and we'll be glad to send you links to all of our books. People are asking, can we go ahead and get the other books? You sure can. Just send a request, and we'll be more than glad to send you links so that you can have soft copies. If you would like a hard copy, you can always order them through the www.peacefulsolution.org, and we'll send them to you. If you're out of the country, it becomes very difficult, and it's a lot easier to send you the digital versions. And you can print them off for yourself, and that way you'll have them. Or you can use, a lot of people are using them now on iPads and so forth, tablets, where they can highlight. And I'm not a digital book kind of guy. I'm more of I need a hard book to take an ink pen and write in. I've tried the digital thing. It just doesn't work very well for me. But anyone that wants to request that, please do so, and we'll be more than glad to send them to you. Our goal is to get the tools in your hands so that you can not only enjoy these classes, but rehearse these things and put these to work not only in your life, but train to put them to work in the lives of many others. And we know we're reaching many, many people, and we're wanting to reach many more people. And of course, you can also request them. If you have requests for other languages, right now we presently only have Spanish and French available, and those are only available in certain books, but we'll be more than glad to send you what we have. So please contact us, and if we have someone already in your country, we will be more than glad to connect you to those that are in your country that are presently have been taking the course for many years, and that there might be schools already open for you to get involved in. So just let us know and we'll communicate with you. But here on LP5E, once again, we're in Procedure 8, and there's quite a few pages, about 6 pages in Procedure 8. And it says, tell students that just like other influences, peer pressure can be both positive and negative. And remember what an influence is. We went over that in the character unit on page 60. We reread a definition here in the self-control unit. But it's anything that has the ability to change the way you think, feel, and act. And anything opens up a very wide and broad spectrum of things. And we've already covered how color can change or persuade you to do things, whether it be spending money. We've already went through a scenario where a soda company advertised in one of the movie trailers before a movie. They just flashed their soft drink on the screen just for a second, and people immediately got up. They were thirsty, and a lot of people went and bought that particular drink. So a lot of these things can be very subtle, and we can be making decisions off of things that we might not even realize why we were influenced to do these things. But these influences are all around us. And remember what we were told, never underestimate the power of an influence. So never think that your mind or you are so strong that it doesn't matter. You know, I can be around this negativity all day long and it won't do anything to me. Well, eventually it does. It wears you down. So be mindful of that when we're talking about building positive character here. But once again, influences and peer pressure can be both positive and negative. Now, we turned over to page 138, and we read the section. We started reading the section. We didn't complete it. There are 2 sides to every coin. Notice it says, emphasize that risk-taking behavior can result of a lack of self-control. So emphasize once again that risk-taking behavior is a result of a lack of self-control. Instruct students to turn to the section entitled Be Your Own Person. Now that's after we complete quite a few pages. So let's turn over to page 138, and we're going to discuss, not in graphic detail, we're going to try to discuss it and explain it in a way. If you are teaching these classes, as the Peaceful Solution has went off into many schools and taught a lot of these topics, if it's available to you, request from the guidance counselors that you are able to teach these classes in separate rooms, so to speak, gender neutral. And now when I say gender neutral, I don't mean that it's very hard to go in schools these days and say, can we have the boys in one class and the girls in the other class? That used to be a simple thing. It's not so simple anymore because of how people identify. But you can request it. It can be a challenge depending on where you live. It really depends on where you live. But if you can teach these classes separate with girls in one class, and it's best to have a female teacher teach the girls, and a boys class or young men's class, and have a male teach the male students. And you'll understand why. We're not going to get very graphic in this class since it's a certification class, but we will give you the things to look for. And if you can get them separated, you can actually get involved into going into much deeper description on how certain activities can affect the body. But once again, you don't want to make people uncomfortable. And when you talk about certain subjects, and you have boys and girls in the same class, you can cause a lot of people to feel uncomfortable. And you also have to be mindful when teaching these classes, even to middle school students, or junior high as they say, especially high school students, that you're talking to people that there's people that are already found out the sad facts of life, so to speak. And it could be done through negative influence. It could be done through force, where someone has done something very violent to them against their own desires. Or it could be something where someone has, through a form of seduction. You can say peer pressure, but it's very common for people to drug people these days. You see it in the news all the time where people, and we'll talk about one drug called ecstasy as we move through this, where people are spiking, the date rape drug as they call it. But there are many different reasons that people experience things. And, and a lot of it, as we'll move through this, we'll find out peer pressure plays a huge role. And when someone tells you, and it's very important to let your students know, when someone says, well, everybody's doing it, that's not true. I'll tell you the situation, not in detail, that I experienced between a couple of teenagers a few months back, and they were caught doing something very inappropriate. And the comment was, when they looked, they said, well, everybody's doing it. And I very quickly looked back and said, no, you're the only ones I know doing it, actually. No, not everybody's doing this. But they, I think, in their minds, really believe that. Everybody's doing it, so it doesn't seem odd. Well, that's when we start telling ourselves lies, and we start trying to convince ourselves. I remember when I was in school, a lot of people claimed they were doing stuff, but they weren't doing it, but they didn't want to look like an oddball. So when someone said they were doing it, oh yeah, I've done that too. Yeah, marijuana done that. Cocaine done that. And these people never even seen the stuff, but they would say, just to look cool, oh yeah, I done that too. Anything that's negative, I did it, yeah. And that was supposed to make you look cool. That was supposed to make you want to be somebody that people would hang around. And in reality, when you start looking at the negative effects, that's not somebody you want to be around. Because when somebody is doing hard drugs or recreational drugs or prescription drugs these days, their life is not going in a positive direction. And you can see how negative their life is going. And it's not cool to be around somebody like that unless you're trying to be a positive role model. You're trying to help them. It's not cool to do it with them. It's not smart to do it with them. In fact, it's like Russian roulette, as we spoke about. You're just trying to go along and see how the next day goes. And that's not the way that anyone wants to live their life. But here on page 138, let's go ahead and review the very top part once again, and then we'll get into these risk-taking behaviors. And once again, we started out by saying there are two sides to every coin. Positive, negative. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about character. We're talking about decisions. We're talking about outcomes in life. It's not just a choice and then it goes away. It's a choice where you see a benefit or a choice where you have a lot of regret, as we covered this hindsight being 20/20. But we don't have reset buttons in life. And it's very important to stress to students, once you make a decision, you're going to have to live with the decision you make. One thing you can never get back is time. And the things that you do in that time is very, very hard to correct if you make a bad choice. If you make the right choice, there's really no regret. When you make the wrong choice, it's not impossible to pull your life back together, but sometimes there's lasting consequences that stick with you as you pull your life back together. So I'm not saying that we can't, because we all, I know when I first heard about the peaceful solution, and everybody I've encountered, you have to start picking up pieces and start putting your life back together, because you realize I'm a pretty negative person. I thought it was a halfway decent person, and I'm realizing, no, just in my own eyes. And we all have to pick up these pieces and put them back together. But here it says at the very top of the page that peer pressure can influence you in both positive and negative ways. How you are influenced depends upon two things: your character and values, and remember we read that, where values plus influence equals character, and that's what you allow in your life. These are things that you have to choose. And then notice the character and values of the people you choose to be around. And we talked about chapter 4, the acceptance unit, where we went through in detail of the stages of what we go through to make sure that we not only choose a friend, but choose a friend that is a true friend. Not somebody we hang around just to be cool, not somebody we hang around just to fit in, but somebody we hang around that has common, not just common personality and common those likes and dislikes, but the way they make decisions and the way they conduct themselves, they don't do anything in any negative ways. They actually work very hard, because making the right decision is not an easy thing. It can be easy some days, but it depends on the environment you're in and the company you keep, so to speak. That can determine whether you make positive or negative decisions. Continuing on, it says, in other words, if someone values being accepted more than developing a positive character, they will be more susceptible to negative peer pressure. That's a weakness. It's a weak link, so to speak, and like a chain. If you have something that's weak, if you see something, whether it be a piece of equipment or anything where you see something can cause danger, if you see a bridge and it looks weak, well, they shut it down. Well, you can't shut down your character because you see a weak link, but you can start immediate repair. And that's done through education and recognizing what's wrong and then working very hard to make the right choice. And that's reminding yourself. The author of The Peaceful Solution once said, write things down on a 3x5 index card and put it in your pocket and take it out, during the day and read it to remind yourself. And these could be positive character traits. These could be reminding yourself what to do. I know of one person that every time they would get angry, they would pull out the card and remind themselves of why they should control their anger. And you know what? They actually have made a huge change in their life to where they've got to where they can control it very well. And that seems like something that, somebody will look at you and go, you really got to have a card to remind you? If it worked and you got a positive result, don't let anyone give you negative peer pressure for trying to say, because that could be negative peer pressure. You don't need a card to make the right choice. Well, some people do, and there's nothing wrong with it. And that's one thing we have to understand in life. If someone's doing something, just because we don't like it does not mean it's wrong. You know, this is personality with likes and dislikes. Now, if someone is doing something that brings harm to themselves, someone else, or the environment, which could be their school, their classroom, their family, the city they live in, yeah, now that can be a problem. But just because somebody's doing something, and it can seem very remedial, you know, man, guy gets mad every time, pulls out a card and reads it. And if it works, there's nothing wrong with it, and hats off to someone that's willing to go that far, because that shows that they're truly trying to make a difference. And, you know, when you work hard to make a difference in yourself, that's when you can help make a difference in other people's lives. But until you make a difference in yourself, it can be a challenge. And we'll get into self-respect as we move forward. But just consider this peer pressure once again and how acceptable we can become if we allow ourselves to be around it. It says peers in the next paragraph. Peers can be a positive influence when they encourage each other to practice self-control and to be honest, respectful, and responsible. There are many ways you and your peers can influence each other to do positive things. For instance, you can encourage each other to develop a positive character by being studious and taking education seriously, to respect the possession of others by not touching anything that doesn't belong to you, to be helpful, healthy, and drug-free. You know, it's something that's very important. And I remember going through school, and to me, sports was the reason I went to school. That's what I loved, was sports. Education was secondary. It was something I had to do to play sports in my mind. But I remember people that I went to school with, they were very studious. You could see they enjoyed class. They were always reading the textbooks. When you went to the library, they were always reading books. You know, and now with social media, you can look back and see what these people became. And a lot of them are very well known as far as doctors and scientists, that they pursued something and they're achieving their life goal of what they wanted to do. You know, and I think back, if we just wanted a positive, beneficial world to where we wouldn't pick up our phones, like today where you see shooting at mall, shooting in North Texas, shooting over the weekends in Chicago, murders in New York. If we wanted to pick up a phone, you know, you always, when you hear that phone go crazy, you know, it starts really loud, buzzing really loud. Mine did this morning with an Amber Alert. You know, whenever I hear those Amber Alerts, I think, man, something's really going wrong somewhere and somebody's really feeling bad. You know, because these are children that are missing and somebody's really scared. And, you know, a lot of times people just, you know, you click it and it's like, noise. But you think about, if you've never really understood what Amber Alerts are, go read about them. You know, they're supposed to help prevent children from being taken. It doesn't really help a child from being taken, but now they're trying to find them as quick as possible. Well, why? Because people have really bad intentions in this world. You know, and is it possible to change this world? It is possible. You know, we allowed it to get the way it is. It's possible to change it. But that takes a lifetime of work and education to do that. And it starts with teaching youth. There are people in society that do want to make life better. And sadly, there's a lot of people that suffer, that are bullied, that have negative peer pressure shown toward them, that are treated indifferent because of color of skin or nationality. I don't know of any Americans that are worried about being left in a 53-foot semi-trailer and in 100-degree plus weather. I don't know any Americans that are worried about going through that. But I know other people that would give their life to have an opportunity to climb in the back of a trailer and get across the border. And it's amazing on where you live and your status in society of what you're willing to risk. Because I can promise you, if you would go ask 53 Americans, hey, would you like to climb in the back of this trailer and go to the next city? You're not going to find very many people. I don't know of anybody, unless they've done something really bad and they want you to get them out of the city. That's the only kind of people I know would go for that. But I can tell you places where you could go, and I bet to get 53 people in the trailer, you wouldn't have to ask 60 people. You'd load that trailer full. They just want a hope of getting across. Well, their hope They have a hope, but they don't even know what their hope is. Well, remember, the peaceful solution is hope that we can all have a better life no matter where you live, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Africa, Europe, South America, Asia. It's completely, it's irrelevant. Human life all should be valued the same. And this is what we're talking about here with this peer pressure and this conformity that we spoke about. We really have to work when we engage each other to realize that this mindset that society has taught us, that to be more important, to make yourself feel better, you have to put someone else down. And that's pretty common in society today. But that's a really false reality. That's very fake when you're dealing in the reality of solving problems. If you ever feel the need to put someone down to make yourself feel better, that's when you realize you need to go find a counselor. Find a trusted adult you can talk to, because that's a sign that you're not trying to get something negative out of your own life. You're too busy trying to excuse it. And we can all do that. We can all be found guilty of that. And it's not a hard thing to do. It's a very common thing in society. But here, the part that is the most uncomfortable part of the peaceful solution to teach, but it is also one of the most necessary things to teach. And once again, we recommend, if you can get the classes separated, boys in one class, girls in the other, it's very important that you do that. But I can tell you, myself and some of the other peaceful solution instructors went somewhere to teach one time this very topic, and our class was all girls, and it was very uncomfortable. And we had to find a way to teach it without making people uncomfortable, but yet get the information across. And it was possible to do it, but as teachers, when you're involved in that, if there's someone uncomfortable in your class, make sure you're the most uncomfortable. And don't make someone else uncomfortable. Try to make sure you're the one that's the most uncomfortable, and that way you'll guard very carefully how you say things and how you word things. And keep in mind, when we get into some of these things that we're going to speak about, you're most likely going to have students in your classroom that have either been through these things or they're going through these things. And it's very, very common to be in a school and teach and have a guidance counselor come to you and say, I'm really glad you mentioned that about herpes, because there was like 8 people in your class that actually have it right now. And that's a very sad thing when you're talking about 15 and 16-year-olds, because that's, as they say, that's the STD that keeps on giving. It never goes away. It comes out with a vengeance, and then it takes a nap, and then it comes back and it takes another nap. And they even have a drug they can give you to help it take a really long nap, but it still comes back. It never goes away. It's there. It's always in your body, and it hibernates, and it jumps around. And there's a lot of people that will tell you that, you can cure these things. All you need is antibiotics. You're done. You can go right back out and do the same thing over again. But scientific studies have proven, and we'll read one article tonight just briefly, scientific studies have proven that if you contract gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, that you can get an antibiotic shot and it will cause the flare-up to go down, but scientific studies have shown that it can hibernate in the body and resurface as heart disease, as cancer, and many other illnesses. So please, when I encourage everyone, when you teach this, for your area, if you're in a different country, try to get statistics for your country. If you're in a different city, try to get statistics for your city. You'll find that it's more readily available to get factual statistics if you'll go talk to someone at your local health clinic. Here in Abilene, there's people that I've spoken to at our health clinic in Abilene. They will tell you very, very abruptly, kindly, but they're very strong about this. What I say, don't quote me or give my name, because our job is to reduce the sexually transmitted diseases in our community, but it's really not our choice, and we're not the one that can control the amount of STDs in our community. And here in Abilene, we have 3 colleges. And the people that deal with these things will tell you that out of control would not be the proper term to use. It's not strong enough to tell you how bad it is. So when you're teaching these things, and if you're going into a school, educate yourself about the city you're going to. Research about the city you're going to. Talk to the guidance counselors at the school or someone that has invited you. Get information from them. Ask them about what's going on. Try to educate yourself about the problems. You'll find where one school has herpes outbreak. There was a school in Georgia that made the news about 10 years ago. Chlamydia had went through the whole school because people were doing some very uneducated decision making. I'm young and nothing's going to take place with me. Well, it does take place, and when you get something and you get that antibiotic shot and you think, there it goes, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever it is, it went away. And then, I seen it was kind of an ad on Facebook the other day, and it said, enjoy your 30s and 40s because when you get 50, that check light engine comes on. And that check light engine reminds you, remember what you did when you were 15, 16, and 17? Remember what you did when you were 23? Yeah, that's me. I'm here now. I'm bigger. I'm stronger. And guess what? Antibiotics won't make me go away this time because I've been living in your liver, or I've been in your heart. I've been in your kidneys. And you're gonna have to make decisions. It's better to never let these things in your body. If you never ever allow these things around you, you don't have to deal with it. And a lot of people will tell you it's impossible. That's not true. Scientific study proves that people that are in committed relationships cannot spread STDs. You have to bring it into the relationship. 2 people, now it can take place through blood transfusions, of course, and it can take place through other means. But the odds in a committed relationship of contracting an STD are very, very small. The odds of contacting an STD in a relationship that only lasts one night and then the next night's another person, the next night's another person, that's like buying a lottery ticket where they're all a winner. You don't know how much you're going to win, but you're going to get something. So I want to read you something before we get into this. But once again, these risk-taking behaviors that we're going to talk about, one is premarital sex or being promiscuous. And this is basically, a lot of schools will ask you, premarital, that sounds religious. Well, I think that's a fair statement. I think that would be a very fair statement. But what we're trying to say is, we're trying to say relationships without commitments. Marital means you've committed. Doesn't mean people are very loyal in their commitments, but at least they put forth some kind of effort. But it's more than just hooking up with somebody different every night. So we're talking about promiscuity. We're not there to preach religion. That's actually not even allowed by the government for the Peaceful Solution to do so. And that's not what we're insinuating. We're insinuating about making commitments and agreements and keeping them. And if you put everything together we've come through thus far, you'll understand about these commitments and agreements we're talking about. Also, the use of illegal drugs. And remember, prescription drugs that are not prescribed to you are also illegal. The use of prescription drugs, if they are prescribed to you, if they're not used as directed, is also illegal. If the doctor says take 1 pill, but 4 makes you feel better, that's illegal. You're actually not allowed to do that. And then, of course, also underage drinking, but we're also going to talk about drinking even if you're of age and doing it in excess to the point where, it affects your decision making. But I want to read you an article here. This article came out in 2020, and this is some facts that we've read before, but I want to read to you the confusion in this right here. And I think our students that have been following the Peaceful Solution for years would recognize what I'm getting ready to read as utter confusion. But this is put out, I don't want to really bash the place that put this out, but there's supposed to be someone that makes you aware of STDs. There's supposed to be someone that helps you to avoid them. But this is the article and what they say. The timing seems right to have all this awkward conversation. This came out in February, and they say February is the season of love after all. We've just celebrated the ones we love most on Valentine's Day. Wherever there is love, there is also risk, not just of vulnerability and for heartbreak, but of the transmission of disease, sexually transmitted diseases. Anyone is at risk for an STD, anyone having contact, that is, STDs can strike no matter what your age, social economic status, gender, or sexual orientation. Now, love is in the air. And if love is in the air, you could get an STD. That's not really true. And I would love to explain, have a conversation with anyone that thinks that is true. Love is not knowing you have a disease and spreading it. Loving yourself or caring for yourself, you would protect yourself from getting. You would not partake of risk-taking behaviors. Remember we talked about in the character unit that love is one of the most misunderstood emotions that there is. True love would not allow any negative decision-making, negative activities. None of those things would be allowed into a person's life if love is supposed to be positive. And love is a positive emotion, which means it doesn't bring harm to yourself, it doesn't bring harm to someone else, and it doesn't bring harm to the environment. Now, the scary part about this is there are millions of people that have STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, that have no idea they have them because they can lie dormant for many years. And here's a few eye-opening statistics that they give, and we've quoted this before. And it says the CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control here in the United States, estimates that the age population 15 to 24 make up half of the 20 million STD infections each year. That's new STD infections. 20 million new STD infections each year in the United States. Older individuals are not exempt. In 2019, the CDC reported a 164% increase in gonorrhea and a 120% increase in syphilis in individuals 55 years and older. So obviously, just because you're out of your youth and now you're older, well, hey, I'm free now. I'm out of it. I can escape this. No, there's never a time. And here's another sad fact. Women are more susceptible to acquiring the infections than men due to the anatomy, due to the makeup of the body. You know, here's a disgusting fact that parasitic STDs are spread through skin contact, skin to skin. You know, if you haven't spent the time to read about monkeypox, which is very popular in the news right now, read about it, research it, see how it's transmitted, see what it takes to transmit it. It's not something that just jumps out on you when you walk by, but it is possible if you have a scratch on your hand and someone has an oozing sore and you touch them and it enters in your scratch, it is possible for you to contract it. But what is the main spread of it? Research it. Make yourself knowledgeable of it because it's becoming greater and greater. And, you know, they're trying to vaccinate people right now, but they're showing that it's not helping. They're vaccinating a lot of people, but it's still spreading. And you're going to hear things like, I'll read you this. Here's a quote from a doctor. And it says, chlamydia is curable, but it's very important that all partners are tested for treatment and avoid reinfection. Well, how do you avoid reinfection unless you change your behavior? How do you avoid reinfection unless you change your lifestyle? And how is it curable if scientific studies have proven that chlamydia affects your heart later on in life, just like syphilis can? Syphilis can destroy your heart. There's scientific studies where it even shows that syphilis can leave your brain looking like Swiss cheese. It literally can start consuming and deteriorating the mind. And these are scientific facts. And don't take our word for it. Get online and educate yourself about these things. Once you do that, you start realizing how serious this topic is and why it's not a can be taught, it should be taught. And really it must be taught. If we want to educate a society to improve their life and to change things, it must be taught. And there's some pretty disgusting things we're getting ready to get to that's in our self-control unit here, but think about it. Individualize this in your own life. I'm not asking for anybody to share their own life as we're sitting here in these classes, or if you're watching, I guess you can say the Peaceful Solution is a family program here. But you do have to be honest with yourself. And if you're in a relationship, you should be very honest with the person you're in the relationship with. These are things that are character building. And there should be a mutual trust that has to be earned, that no one would do something to bring forth a disease. And this is something that should be taught at a young age. And we'll get into people thinking, that's old-fashioned. Well, I'd rather be called old-fashioned than be getting an antibiotic shot for gonorrhea, syphilis, or chlamydia, or to find out that I have HIV. I would rather be called old-fashioned by far than to suffer these things. Once you suffer these things in life, it's important to remember there's no reset button. And society tends to think, especially young people think, one, that'll never happen to me, or two, I can always get a shot. I'll be okay. Well, it's going to affect you later on in life, and there are millions of people that can share this with you. But here's some pretty interesting things that you can also share with your class and get them thinking. Notice here it says premarital sex at any age is a big problem. We just read that even 55 years and above, STDs are picking up at an alarming rate. Rarely does anyone marry the person they first have sex with. The more partners you are exposed to, the more likely you are to contract an STD such as AIDS, gonorrhea, syphilis, or herpes. The fact is, when you have sex, you are not having sex with just one person. Please underline this, highlight it, circle it. This is a scientific fact. This right here is not an opinion. Once again, you are not just having sex with just one person, but with all of the people that person has ever had sex with. This was a study that was done in the UK, and the headline was, most British men could say they have slept with 1,000 people, because of the amount of people that think about this. Let's say you have a random person that goes to a nightclub, once a week. And I've talked to people, these numbers that I'm getting ready to give you from people I've talked to are very low. To me, they're astronomical, but to the average person in society that's went to a nightclub for many years, these numbers are low. But let's say they hook up with somebody every Friday night, so to speak, 52 weeks out of the year. And let's say they do that for, 5 years? What does that come to, 250? And let's say the people they hook up with, did it 26 times a year or 13 times a year. You start multiplying these numbers together, and of course they did it with other people, and they did it with other people, and they did it with other people, and start adding all these numbers up. It can go up extremely fast. And then remember the story I told you about, and it's readily available if you want to go online and read about these things. It's very available. Sadly, there's countries like Thailand and other countries where they're known for that's where people go to travel for prostitution. Imagine when someone hooks up with a prostitute who they're doing it for money, and I'm not speaking down about people that, I know people make really bad decisions, but I also know there's a lot of people, due to negative peer pressure society has placed on people and not seeing any hope, they're making decisions because they think that's the only option they have. So I'm not speaking down about anyone, because I'm a firm believer anyone can change their life for a betterment, but they have to be given the opportunity. And that's what we're striving to do. But imagine if someone is working prostitution and they're working 5 days a week. And, you know, they're pretty common. These guys that will go to the prostitutes, they just don't go to one prostitute. There's no loyalty in prostitution. They'll go to different ones. And in today's society, it's a girl this week and a guy next week. And sometimes it's both at the same time. And I'm not trying to be graphic. I'm just trying to get in your mind what's taking place. Start adding up the number when you talk about how this DNA transfer, and you can start seeing how you can just go out one time and hook up with one person, and it can be like you slept with 50, 100, 200, 300 people. You know, it can even be up in the thousands just from the one person that you slept with. It can be that dangerous. And these are scientific facts. These are not opinions. These are not scare tactics. These are scientific facts. That's what we use to base decision making on. You know, if I take my hand and I lay it down and I take a hammer and I hit my finger, it's going to hurt. If I hit it, it's possible I can break it. But it's definitely going to hurt. You know, I can tell you I'm missing the top part of this finger. I was working on an industrial sewing machine one time, and even though I know if you mash the paddle, the needle goes down. Well, I was working on the needle, and for some reason, I thought it was smart to hit the pedal. And it went right through my finger, and I thought it was smart to jerk my finger loose. Well, there goes the top of my finger. All of that made sense in like 2 seconds or less, but when I look back at it, I thought, I probably should unplug that thing. You know, but hindsight is 20/20. I can't get my top of my finger and put it back on there. You know, and of course it's eventually grown back to where it's just a small niche gone now. But these are things that, you know, it's not a life maker or breaker. STDs are a life changer. Imagine that you're somebody that, well, think about it. Be honest with yourself. If you want somebody and you want a person, if you're a man looking for a wife or a woman looking for a husband, you're really wanting someone that's going to bring an atmosphere to where your life can be enjoyable. Nobody's wanting to get into a relationship to where it's going to be hell on earth from this day forward. Nobody really goes into a relationship hoping for that. And a lot of times, I'd say many times, not all the time, some people don't desire to have children. Some people do. But imagine, and this is for men and women, you know, or women. It's not just men and it's not just women. But some of these things that people engage in can lead to them being sterile for the rest of their life. And imagine you finally find someone who wants to be committed to you and you want to be committed to them, but due to the activities of your past life, no children. That's not an option. Think about what that does to your relationships. You know, I've talked to couples where they have actually divorced because, well, he can't give me children or she can't give me children, so I'll find someone that can. You know, and that's pretty devastating. And it's sad that things take place that way. But we don't think about this when we're committing these acts. We don't think about how many people we're actually getting to know on a very intimate basis. And it's not like someone sits down and shows you the photo album of everyone you're going to encounter that night. No, you don't see it until the sores, the oozing. And I don't want to get graphic, but research the pain that comes with it. Research what scientific proof says and other people give testimonies about. STDs are not like you scratch your finger and you put a Band-Aid around it. You're talking about your body screams in pain. I've never experienced it, don't want to experience it, but I read a lot of articles about it. And they say it is horrific. These are things we can avoid, though. But continuing on here, it says, you've already explored how the sexual content of popular shows influence a teen's choice to experiment with sexual behavior. And of course, if you don't remember, that was on page 125 of Monkey See, Monkey Do. And you can go back and watch. It was William that taught a lot on that class, and Catan also explained in detail those two classes. If you don't remember them, if you haven't seen them, they were just a few weeks ago, go back and rewatch those classes. There was a lot of detail and a lot of information at least an hour in both class to help educate and bring you up to date that we can't really go over continually. We try to rehearse these things, but a lot of information brought in those classes that will help you build your notes as you move forward. Now, once again, the peaceful solution brings things that are proven, not opinionated, but proven. We're not going to tell someone, you can go do it and you can get a shot and you'll be better. That sounds nice, but that's not true. That's not reality, and that doesn't give someone hope. So continuing on here, it says the amount of sexual content on television has contributed to the attitude that premarital sex, once again, these are relationships without commitments, one-night stands, hooking up every night or every other night, every other weekend, once a month, once a year, it doesn't matter. You're playing Russian roulette. So once again, this premarital sex among preteens and teens and adults is no big deal, and that everybody's doing it. Everybody is not doing it. Someone can tell you that. That is not true. Everybody at the nightclub you're at is most likely trying to do it. That's why they're there. People don't go to nightclubs just to hang out. They go to hook up. And someone asked me one time, are you trying to say anything bad about nightclubs? Yes, I am. It's a place of negative peer pressure. It's a place where people go to seduce people. And it's not just nightclubs. It can be many other places. But when you go to a nightclub, you know as well as I do, when people go, they dress very provocative. The women know that they can go and they'll play with a guy's mind all night just so they don't have to pay for any drinks. He'll pay for them all. And if he's lucky, as they say, that's all he'll lose out on is his drinks that he bought. Because if she's letting you do that for her, she's probably did it with other guys, and there's probably more to that than buying drinks. And if you're lucky, as they say, you won't get anything else. That'll be it. But you think about, when you go to the paint store, what do you go to buy? You go to buy paint, right? When you go to the grocery store, you go to buy food. You go to the clothing store, you go to buy food. When you go to the nightclub, you go for what? It's pretty self-explanatory, right? And that's not the only place you can do it, but that is a very common place. There are businesses that are built on that. That's why they have no cover charge for women tonight. They know the more women they can get in, the more guys that are going to come. And that's the marketing scheme. But nowhere ever do you have them handing out STD pamphlets as you walk through the door. That's bad for business. Don't bring that reality in here. Well, continuing on, it says, this attitude that it's no big deal or everybody's doing it, when you combine that with peer pressure, it becomes a dangerous combination. As a result, many teens suffer from sexually transmitted diseases as well as unwanted pregnancies. But no need to fear. People are fighting for your rights to abort children every day. I read an article was yesterday where a 10-year-old is fighting for rights to have an abortion in Ohio. A 10-year-old. When I was 10 years old, I would have never imagined something like that. But that's where society has gotten to. Now, I don't know the story behind it. I don't know the details behind it. I don't really believe everything that I read when people put out stories and they think they give every detail. That's a very private matter, and I'm not trying to say anything positive or negative about the 10-year-old or anybody else because I don't know the details behind it. But that's a very horrific thing for a 10-year-old to go through. And an abortion doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't fix it at all. Obviously, there was a problem before that. And we'll mention abortions as we move forward here. But it says the factors contribute to the high rate of high school dropouts. They drop out because you got to raise a child. Children Raising Children was the program they had back when I was in high school. That's what they called it. It says children who are born to unwed mothers, this is people that are not in relationships with commitments. In other words, the father impregnates the woman and then he disappears. He's off and gone. And I remember when I was in high school, there was one teenager who was very popular. He was the quarterback When I was going into high school, he was the quarterback of the football team, and his senior year, there were 5 girls pregnant by him. And his answer for all of it was aborting all of them. But there was a couple girls that didn't want to. Imagine being a senior in high school, you don't even have a job yet, and you're facing paying child support on 3 children. Not only is that not a smart business decision, that's a very ignorant decision in general. Because obviously, if you just commit to 1, 2 other children, they're not going to associate with them. It's very different if a father is part of their child's life. But when you're talking about people that do things like this, they're not intending on being part of a child's life. When their idea is to, just kill it, execute it, get away with get it out of my mind. I don't want nothing to do with it. That pretty much lays the ground that child is not going to ever know its biological father. You hope somebody else will step in and do the job. Will help train up and teach. Because just stepping in and taking someone fishing is not enough. Training and teaching, educating, that's what a true, whether it be a father or a guardian or a mother, that's what they do. Just hanging out watching TV, that's not enough. That's what leads, as we said, to what's going on today. That's where these influences, a large part of where these influences are coming from. But it says, once again, children who are born to unwed mothers are more likely to be neglected and physically, mentally, and emotionally abused. Please go back and reread the 2nd chapter of the character unit, and it's entitled All in the Family, where we talk about the abuse that takes place in a family. Just bring that back to your mind when you're teaching these classes. And if you're able to go through the whole program with your students, bring it back to their mind also. But a lot of your students sitting in that class, they're going to relate to this really well. They're going to already, understand what you're talking about. And when you have a large classroom, you're going to have students that are living in father-only homes, students that live in mother-only homes, students that are living with their grandparents, students that have this ideal relationship with mother and father both at home, students that live with mother and father but they're abusive, drinking, drugs. You'll have as many colors as you can find in the spectrum. That's how many relationships you'll find in your students themselves. So be very mindful in everything that you teach. In addressing this topic, you give your students hope and you give them direction on how they can make it better. Anyone can tell someone what they did is wrong. The Peaceful Solutions goal is to show others how no matter what you've done that's wrong, no matter how wrong you've done it, you can actually change your life to do better. Doesn't mean, and there's no magic potion somebody can sprinkle on you and go, but you don't have to answer for anything you've done up until this point. We found in life that whatever you do, eventually you got to answer for it. You live long enough, you got to answer for it. And that's where our bodies start breaking down. A lot of these decisions we make, and these are scientific studies that back this up, decisions we make eventually affect our lives if we live long enough for it to do so. But once again here, it says because teens are not emotionally or financially prepared to deal with the stress of raising a child, many unwanted pregnancies also end in abortion. And of course we see what's going on with the abortions right now, where the Supreme Court overturning the Roe versus Wade, with the government actually says that it's your constitutional right to have an abortion. Now they say the Constitution has never said such a thing. But there's a huge push to fight for this. And, I question society and I ask myself, why is there not a huge push to educate people to not get to the point to where you're wanting to kill fetuses anyway? It has a heartbeat. It's proven that they feel pain. I've talked to many people through teaching the Peaceful Solution, women obviously, that have had abortions and regret it very, very much. There was one lady that had an abortion, and she told me, she goes, have you ever seen how it takes place? And at that point, I hadn't. And she told me of a video to go watch online, and I went to watch the video, and it actually showed where the child, you could see legs, You could see a chest. You could see it looked like it was sucking on its thumb. And then they turned on this vacuum system and it just ripped it all to pieces. It literally it was like putting it in a blender and it shredded it down. Now, I really trying to control myself with my, what I have to say on this, but I don't hold much regard for someone that says, it's okay, it didn't feel anything. How do you know? If we were to take you and put you into this situation and rip you apart piece by piece, would it be okay if I said, don't worry, he didn't feel anything? It's always interesting how someone who they believe it's okay will defend it as, I didn't feel any pain whatsoever. How do you possibly know that? And then we even get to the point, and this is what really lets you know, it's not really if the child's in the womb, because now they have late-term abortions to where it can actually be on its way out or out, and you can still choose to abort the child. So it's not just about it doesn't feel anything in the womb. It's about people who are not educated on making decisions, and they're not making responsible decisions, and they're choosing to murder something or someone to get out of the responsibility of what the decisions they have chosen to make. Now, I also know there's a lot of people that, through rape and so forth, these things come up. But I have met someone that had a child through rape, and they raised the child. I think the child was about 14 when I met that person was talking to them. And they said the child has no idea that she was raped and that the father was a rapist, and she's found that the child's just fine. That she's enjoyed her life, even though she lives with the dark secret, that's her child, and she's going to raise it, and she's going to make the best she can with it. And I haven't talked to that person in quite a few years, but that's inspiring to see that someone would do that, because it's not right that, and rape is not just women either. Men are done the same way, just women kind of live with the consequence of bringing forth a life. Men live with the consequence of suffering in their bodies for many years. Well, let's read the straight talk really quick, because we want to conclude this part. We want to conclude this part, and this will give William a part to rehearse and then to build on. But straight talk, no pun intended, by the way. Someone pushed their buttons. Remember on page 130, we're not a robot. No one pushes our buttons. Many teenagers now believe that remaining virgins until marriage is old-fashioned. Believing that sex is common among their age group, they feel pressure into having sex so they can be like everybody else. Everybody else is at the health clinic. Be careful what you want. Approximately 1 million teens every year in the United States alone get pregnant. Remember, in the character unit, we started off by teaching that's one of the really bad scenes that are taking place right now, along with car accidents and overdoses. This is also one of the really bad scenes, these unwanted pregnancies. Well, life for them has changed so much that if they could go back in time, they would choose to be old-fashioned and make better choices. Well, we don't get to go back in time. There's no reset button. There's nothing we can do once we make that decision. Once you're in a relationship as a teenager and you find out, I'm pregnant. Well, now it's time to see what kind of person you are. If you are doing things that you knew you weren't supposed to be doing, okay, well, you did it. Now let's see what you do from this point. Now you're faced with another situation. Will you make the right choice or a wrong choice? Taking a child and aborting a child, I don't care how many politicians stand up there and try to tell you it's your right, it's your right, it's your right. How is it, and I ask you this to think about this. What is the difference between a child being born full term, coming out of its mother's womb, and being aborted? So it's a life that's sitting there in front of you, and it's aborted, and then its body parts, just like other fetuses, are put on the market for sale. It's a very big business. What's the difference between taking that child's life and then murdering an adult or a teenager? What's the difference? And something else I want you to think about. In Alabama, not just Alabama, but this made the news. Other states do the same thing, where they support abortion. They say it's the woman's right. This was a few years back, where they said it was not a life. If a mother wanted to have an abortion, it was okay because that's not a true life. But there was a drunk driving incident where a man hit a pregnant mother, and in the drunk driving incident, the mother and the child in her womb died, and they charged the man with 2 murders. But this is the very same people that said you can abort a child because it's not a life. That's the confusion that society is faced with, and that's the confusion that we have to eliminate. And I'm not saying eliminate people's right to choose, but eliminate people's lack of education that allows them to make bad choices that puts them in this position to begin with. If you're never put in the position to make a bad choice, you're not going to be able to make it. And if you're put in a position where you can make a bad choice, but you're educated on how to make a proper choice, you're going to come out okay. But if you're not educated in that and you're not taught responsibility, people suffer and die. And I don't care how much they tell you, they didn't feel a thing. Consider if that was you. And if someone did you that way. So think about that. So we're going to stop right there. William's going to pick up on the next page with continuing on in Procedure 8. The next class will be 7-6. That'll be this coming Wednesday at 5:30. So once again, go back and rehearse and prepare your minds, and go back and watch those classes that William and Catan already taught. And we'll be continue building on what it is to not only have these STDs in your life, but also drugs. Thank you once again for joining us.